This is GMOs by Johnson Saracola, Golden Dillingham,
White Shemoff,
and Ethan Hunt.
So, what is a GMO? Let's start with the FDA. A common term we come across in this context is GMO, which stands for genetically modified organism. This can mean anything created through a process called genetic engineering. The process, as seen in this image from the Plant and Soil Sciences e-library, and again reinstated by the FDA, includes identifying a gene responsible for a desirable trait in an organism, copying that gene responsible, inserting it into the DNA of another organism, and ultimately growing a new organism. Immediately, we can see that this has some serious pros. It allows us to create a more reliable and easily obtainable food supply. Again, the FDA says, quote, by genetically modifying organisms, we can increase crop yield and even enhance the nutritional content of food, making a more reliable food supply. Additionally, GMOs can be engineered to resist pests and harsh conditions, making it easier to obtain food where traditional farming is difficult. Additionally, Robert Paulberg, a researcher on food and agricultural policy with a focus on farming technologies and poverty, says that, quote, by most conventional definitions of biosafety, GMO crops currently on the market have not disturbed nature beyond any more than conventional crops. It's also important to note that this comes at a cost. According to the Non-GMO Project, an organization dedicated to ending GMO use, there are potential environmental and health hazards associated with the use of GMOs. They can potentially disrupt natural ecosystems and biodiversity. When they are introduced into an ecosystem, they may outcompete native species and crossbreed with wild relatives, leading to unintended consequences, including mutation. Furthermore, there are concerns about the potential health effects of consuming GMOs in humans. While some studies suggest they are safe, more research is needed to fully understand their long-term impacts on human health. And this image is from BioExplore.
Okay, so how can we fix this problem? The first solution to this problem will be to educate the public on genetically modified organisms, promoting their benefits and risks. So the way of executing this would be implementing labeling in order to state the benefits and risks of GMOs in a simple and easy manner. Stephen Lamb, holder of a bachelor's in political economy from Princeton and co-founder of ZBiotics, states that mandatory labeling is good for consumers because it will help them be fully informed and less confused when they consider buying genetically modified products. Additionally, he goes on to say that it is better for the world and that it can benefit from increased understanding and use of genetic engineering technology that is already being developed to help tackle problems like starvation, disease, and climate change. By eliminating the confusion about GMOs, individuals can make clear and educated decisions about what they are purchasing. With this solution, all audiences can be benefited by learning more about genetically modified products and how they should handle them in their daily lives. So, the pros and cons of this solution. One benefit is the elimination of skepticism between people and genetically modified organisms. By reading the labels and learning more about GMOs, individuals can gain a better understanding of how they work instead of making decisions about them blindly. Additionally, labels prove helpful to those uneducated on the topic as they easily explain functions of GMOs and their distinct qualities. Labels also provide a faster way of informing people as they are easy to produce and they are convenient to read. Some cons of this solution include the misunderstanding of these labels or people just outright ignoring them. The way to fix these problems will be to add simplistic wording or make the label stand out in order to avoid these issues.
Another solution is to increase government regulation surrounding GMOs. According to Daniel M. Wiesenapfel from the University of Findlay, Ohio, studying animal science, eliminating all GMOs, regulations of GMOs should be tightened because due to the gaps in regulatory process, environmental problems have arisen as a result of GMO integration into the agricultural market. Therefore, using regulation would allow us to minimize the impact that GMOs have on our environment. Rebecca Bratspees from the Vermont School of Public Health writes, "The time is ripe to increase regulation on agricultural biotechnology." Bratspees and Wiesenapfel agree that it is time to increase regulation on GMOs to better the world and local environments. the use of harsh regulations surrounding GMOs would greatly limit the wellhood of farmers who depend on the innovations of GMOs for their livelihood. The regulation or removal of GMOs, according to Brian Wallheimer from Purdue University, eliminating all GMOs in the United States, the model shows corn yields reduce 11.2% on average, soybeans lose 5.2% on average, and cotton 18.6%. Shown here, the farming industry would lose a large chunk of profit if GMOs were removed. On the other hand, the potential benefit of GMOs are also great. According to the FDA, or the Food and Drug Administration, the use of regulations of genetically modified crops would greatly reduce the environmental impact the farming sector has on our environment. Regulations on GMOs would allow us to minimize the impact that farming, and specifically GMOs, have on our environment.
So, what is the best solution? Well, we believe that the best solution is more government regulations. Why? First, let's look at the fundamental problem with a lack of regulations. Whether intentional or not, GMOs can cause more harm than good, shown through how Amanda Barrell cites specifically how GMOs can transfer genes to plants that were intended to have them, such as transferring things such as pesticide and herbicide immunity to things such as super weeds, creating super weeds. And GMOs can also have adverse health effects on consumers if they're introduced into open markets without prior testing or enough precautions. And lastly, GMOs could be used to further corporate power and greed rather than being used to solve food insecurity. But why not increased education and food labels? Well, while increased education and food labels may provide more consumer knowledge and informed consumption, they don't solve the fundamental problem with all these issues, which is a lack of regulations. And even beyond that, government regulations could actually present a benefit to farmers, despite what people might say about them decreasing the crop yields and profits of farmers. It's actually a net benefit in the long run by getting rid of things such as faults in their crops and preventing things such as terminator seeds, which are identified by the University of British Columbia as seeds which only last one generation in order to create dependencies on the company that distribute them. Government regulations provide a safety blanket for farmers. And just because we're picking government regulations over food labels and increased education doesn't mean we're going to neglect consumer knowledge. In fact, government regulations could mandate that private companies inform both the government and citizens about the specific genetic modifications made inside of their products. So, now that we have a general why, let's look at how we could implement effective government regulations. Christian Stray from Rutgers University says and cites the key empirical example of the Plant Protection Act. He says, and I quote, "The Plant Protection Act gives the USDA and APHIS regulatory oversight on plants that have been changed or produced by genetic modifications. The Plant Protection Act represents a starting point from which we can build even more effective government actions in terms of GMOs." Antonson T. goes on to specify how we could do this through the process of review. He says, and again, I quote, "Assessment needs to be carried out by professionals with ethical expertise and practical knowledge, and in action involved by relevant actors and groups are actively involved." Straight Christian goes a step further, though, by saying that not only by increasing the rigorousness of review boards, but also by expanding the Plant Protection Act to cover other areas of oversight, we can make sure that GMOs are an effective solution by expanding the Plant Protection Act to things such as the physical introduction of GMOs into an environment, imports and exports of GMOs through a country, as well as the testing and development of GMOs in labs. We can make sure that they are an effective solution to food shortages around the world while minimizing their impact on the environment, the economy, and the safety of both farmers and consumers. Our bibliography.
Okay, I'm going to start with you, Ethan. Reflecting on your colleagues' work, which one had the greatest impact on your overall understanding of the problem your group identified?
I'd have to say Dante's had the biggest impact because his lens was scientific and explained a lot to me about how GMOs are made, the specific modifications that come with GMOs and their implications in a scientific world, not just the government. And while most of us talked about the impacts of regulations and the government, Dante really delved into what makes a GMO, what can a GMO do, and that really helped increase my knowledge about the topic.
Okay, thank you. Dante, what is a way in which your team's resolution makes you think differently about your own research?
My own research didn't really include government regulation, as Ethan said. It mainly delved into what is a GMO, what can a GMO do. But I do believe that government regulation as a solution would be an effective solution because it could also include education, as stated in our presentation. But this really changed my mindset because I went from what can GMOs do to how are they going to impact the environment and how can government regulation help us minimize that impact.
Okay, great, thank you. Colton, can you give one specific way your thinking changed as a result of learning about Ethan's findings?
So my way of thinking changed as after reading Ethan's paper with the ethical lens, he explained how GMOs need to be regulated and watched as they are being imported into the U.S. as it is important for the safety and health of the public that they are regulated. So it increased my understanding as I wasn't aware that they needed to be regulated going in, and just instead of allowing GMOs to be open and around free without any regulation, he explained how they need to be regulated.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Wyatt, how did the group decide to include Colton's perspectives or conclusions into your presentation?
The group decided to include Colton's perspectives and conclusions into our group because his lens was environmental, and we were reviewing the environmental impacts of GMOs. His paper allowed our group to have a better understanding on our problem and why GMOs were a problem to the environment by reducing genetic biodiversity.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Great. Thank you, guys.
Genetic whatever is going to show us. Genetic whatever.
So this might be a good time to work on your paper if you don't have a stand presentation. Some kids have that too. Don't be scared.